Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies. Speaking today will be Professor Michael Bar-Zohar. Professor Bar-Zohar is a professor of history at Emory University. He's the author of many books, and I remember still as a teenager having bought a paperback copy of his first book, The Hunt for German Scientists. And he's written numerous books in the intervening 3 decades, among them L'Oreal, Nazis, and the Arab Boycott, and Ben-Gurion, a biography. His most recent book is, as I mentioned earlier, Beyond Hitler's Grasp, The Heroic Rescue of Bulgaria's Jews, which Professor Bar-Zohar not only brings his writing and scholarly talents to, but his special emotional connection as a Bulgarian Jew himself. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Bar-Zohar.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for mentioning my books. I must say that I read them all and I enjoyed them tremendously. When I speak about the Bulgarian rescue, and I know that I speak before scholars like you and people who know very much about the Holocaust, I have to ask you to forget about the Holocaust. This is a different story. You won't hear about death camps and death marches and ghettos. This is a story which strangely happened in a different sphere, in a different world. First of all, Bulgaria. Bulgaria is situated, as most of you know, south of Romania and the Danube River. Its eastern border is the Black Sea. The west, the western border was Yugoslavia. On the south, Turkey and Greece. Bulgaria was a revisionist state between the 2 world wars. She wanted to recuperate territories she had lost during the First World War. She wanted to take Thrace back from Greece, Macedonia from Yugoslavia, and the fertile plain of Dobruja from Romania. When the Second World War approached, Bulgaria knew very well that the Allies would never help her to get these territories. The Soviet Union would never dismember Yugoslavia. Great Britain would never dismember Greece. And the only possible power to help Bulgaria to recuperate these territories turned to be Germany, Nazi Germany, which was also a revisionist state, which had no feelings or close interests in Greece or Yugoslavia, and it could pressure the Romanians to do what Bulgaria wanted. And indeed, in early 1939, a conference was held in Vienna, hosted by Hitler, in which finally Romania agreed to give back to Bulgaria the plain of Dobruja in the north. That was a big reason for big rejoicement in Bulgaria. Streets were named after Hitler and Mussolini, and Germany turned to look as the best ally Bulgaria could dream about. When the war started, Bulgaria tried to play for a while the role of a neutral country, but she was very quickly drawn toward the German sphere of interests. And then, in 1940, Bulgaria joined the tripartite pact with Germany, and German troops came into Bulgaria. Finally, they carried out from Bulgaria 2 very dramatic and very powerful offensives against Greece and against Yugoslavia, which lasted only a few weeks. And after these offensives, all of a sudden, Bulgaria found herself being handed Thrace, which she coveted for so long, from Greece, and being handed Macedonia from the now destroyed and dismembered Yugoslavia. For Bulgaria, that was the achievement of a dream. King Boris of Bulgaria became the king unifier. Bulgaria became Greater Bulgaria, having achieved everything she wanted without having to fire a single bullet. Not one Bulgarian soldier had participated so far in the war. I would say that there was a difference between Dobruja in the north and Thrace in Macedonia. Dobruja, which was given to Bulgaria by Romania, was accepted by the entire world as being a part of Bulgaria now. So it was completely integrated into Bulgaria. Thrace and Macedonia were officially annexed to Bulgaria or reunited with Bulgaria. Actually, it was only under Bulgarian administration. There was no representation in the Bulgarian parliament of any members of parliament from Thrace or Macedonia, and the local mayors and chiefs of police and other administration positions were all sent from Bulgaria proper, what they called Old Bulgaria, the old boundaries of Bulgaria. But there was a price to be paid for this help and this support from Germany. And the price, as always, was the Jewish population. And Bulgaria passed several laws and edicts which were about to harm the Jewish population. But before I go into that, I would like to tell you something about the Bulgarian Jews. Bulgaria was a country, during the war, it was about 6.5 million in population. The Bulgarian Jews were about 50,000, less than 1%. A very strange kind of people. First of all, they were Sephardi Jews. And I would say, as I belong to them, we were what they call the pure Sephardi Jews. Please. Yes, because, and we still believe that we are, because Sephardi in Hebrew means Spanish. Sepharad in the Bible means Spain. And when they called the Sephardic Jews, this was about the Jews who had been exiled from Spain. Today they mix, everybody in Israel or in the world who is not an Ashkenazi Jew becomes automatically a Sephardi Jew. And Ethiopians, for instance, or Iraqis, or whatever, whoever is not Ashkenazi is a Sephardi. That's not true. The Sephardi Jews were actually a rather small group of people who, when they were exiled from Spain in 1492, they decided to accept the call from Sultan Bayezid of Turkey, the emperor of the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, who invited the Jews expelled from Spain to come and give him and his kingdom their expertise and their knowledge. And a few of the Jews who were expelled agreed and went and settled down in Turkey, Greece, southern Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria. This was the base of the pure Sephardi, pure Spanish Jews. Some of them later migrated to Italy and to Holland. But the Spanish Jews who went to this part of the world spoke the Spanish language and kept it actually until today. What they call the Ladino, the Spanish language, the Spanish songs, the Spanish romanceros. I was put to bed when I was a child by lullabies in ancient Spanish, which were sung by my grandmother. They passed from one family to the other. And these Spanish Jews, especially in Bulgaria, I must admit, were not very, very religious. We knew we were Jewish. We were very proud of being Jewish. We did not exactly observe all the Jewish rules and regulations. We didn't celebrate very fervently the Jewish holidays. Many of us did not know what Yom Kippur was or even what Shabbat was. We didn't know what kosher was. I had never seen in Bulgaria a Jew with a skull cap and yarmulke in the street. I had never seen a man with a beard or side locks. And I had very rarely seen Ashkenazi Jews. Actually, we had about 5% of the Bulgarian Jews were very strange people. They had names like Rosenberg, Leibowitz, Lieberman, Horowitz. and we used to call them Tedescos or Chaldeos, which are two ancient names for Germany. And it was very strange. I remember I asked my mother, I would say, these people, these Tedescos, are they really Jewish? Because she had a very nice friend, her name was Shelley Rosenfeld. She was such a sweet lady, she couldn't be that bad. And my mother told me, you know, they're like Jews, she said. Like Jews. And they, you know, when the chief rabbi of Sofia was carrying out the prayer on Saturday, he would say, "Dear Jewish friends," and some Tedescos, right? Which were outside of the community. And that was, and I saw really the majority when I came to Israel. Could you imagine my surprise to find myself surrounded by like Jews, as in this country, of course. And the Bulgarian Jews had also another thing which was very important. They were very deeply integrated in Bulgarian life. They spoke Bulgarian very well. They dressed like Bulgarians. And there was one element which is very unpleasant, but which exists, we cannot deny it, that in many places, the Jews, one of the reasons of anti-Semitism was the hatred, the instinctive, primitive hatred of the alien, who looks different, who speaks a different language, who has different kind of rights. This element did not exist in Bulgaria, because the Bulgarian Jews looked very much like Bulgarians, spoke Bulgarian better than the Bulgarians, and even were very deeply devoted to the country. Although being less than 1% of the population, there were between 4 and 8% in the numbers of soldiers who fought in Bulgaria's wars, and the people fallen and decorated by Bulgaria for bravery. They felt very strongly belonging to this country. And as I said, in spite of the fact that they were not religious, they were very patriotic Bulgarians. On the other hand, Bulgaria was a very tolerant country toward the Jewish people. Bulgaria was for the last 500 years, until 1878, under Turkish rule. And under the Turkish yoke, actually everybody was equal. The average Bulgarian grew together with Greeks, with Turks, with Jews, with Gypsies, with Armenians, and they were all equal. So when Bulgaria was finally liberated, by the way, by the Russian army, which she always remembered, they felt that it was one nation. And when they promulgated their constitution, it turned to be one of the most progressive constitutions in Europe at the end of the 19th century. And they took this constitution very seriously. I always try to compare it with the French constitution, which was even more progressive, and which gave us the immortal slogan of liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity. But the French, the moment the Nazi soldiers marched down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, decided to freeze their constitution until the war was over and forgot about all these ideals. In Bulgaria, this did not happen. The Bulgarians have a kind of very deep, very enduring idealism, sometimes bordering even on naivete. But they believed in their constitution. And if their constitution said that the people, the Bulgarian citizens are equal, so they were equal. The last element which you should know about Bulgaria and the relation between Jews and Bulgarians is that most of Bulgaria's Jews were poor people. In Bulgaria, there were no Jewish bankers, no magnates, no tycoons, no industrialists, nobody you could depict in the eyes of the general public as somebody who is trying to exploit the toil of the poor Bulgarian masses. Most of Bulgarian Jews lived in the poorest neighborhoods, side by side with the Christians. And they suffered together and worked together and rejoiced together and starved together. And it was very difficult to make these poor Bulgarians believe that their Jewish neighbor, who is also a blue-collar worker and starves together with them, can be somebody who is exploiting Bulgaria for his own benefit. So this was the background when Bulgaria decided to go into the road of anti-Semitism. Of course, Bulgaria has its lots of right-wing people, some of them virulent and fanatic, who Nazis and fascists, but most of Bulgaria's anti-Semitism was imported from abroad. It was not Bulgarian. It did not suit the Bulgarian society. In 1941, Bulgaria passed the Bulgarian law for the defense of the nation. It was a copy of the Nuremberg racial laws against the Jews. Property had to be confiscated. Jews had to be evacuated out of Sofia. They had to wear a distinctive sign, a Jewish star, which turned to be the smallest star worn in Europe, a very tiny star made of a yellow celluloid. It was not very strongly implemented, but later Bulgaria also created a Commissariat for Jewish Questions, which was headed by a fanatic Nazi whose name was Alexander Belev, a Bulgarian. And a strange triumvirate was created inside the Bulgarian government. The prime minister was Bogdan Filov, university professor who was very close to Germany. He was actually the German man, the man of the Germans in Bulgaria's government. And he was very anti-Semitic. Under him, we had his political rival, but in the field of policies, his ally, who was Peter Gabrovsky, the Minister of Interior, was also one of the former founders and leaders of one of the most extremist pro-Nazi organizations in Bulgaria, the Ratnik. And under Gabrovsky, we had the Commissariat for Jewish Questions, with at its head Alexander Belev. They were in charge of implementing the anti-Jewish laws. What happened in Bulgaria, which was a kind of precursory sign about the future, was that the moment the anti-Jewish law, the law for the defense of the nation, was published, there was, even before its official publication, there was an avalanche of protest from all strata of the Bulgarian society. And I say all strata because you had petitions written by the Union of Bulgarian Lawyers, by the doctors, by the Union of Bulgarian Artists, by the Union of Bulgarian Writers, including their most famous and the greatest Bulgarian writer, I think, in the 20th century, Elin Pelin, a close friend of the king himself. And then you had petitions written the same way, with the same devotion, by shoemakers, by bakers, by workers, by train employees, and by people from different neighborhoods in Sofia or out of Sofia. And they were all against this law, including the princes of the Bulgarian church. The Bulgarian church is Bulgarian Pravoslav. You can call it close to the Greek Orthodox Church, but the Russian church was the same. And its attitude was rather different. Anyway, there was a tremendous protest, which was very surprising, but the law was passed anyway. The Commissariat was created, and then, at the end of 1942, we see a directive from Eichmann, from Adolf Eichmann, saying to one of his assistants, saying, now it's time to hit the last 3 countries from which we have not taken the Jews until now, which are Hungary, Denmark, and Bulgaria. And in January 1943, a special envoy of Eichmann arrives in Bulgaria. His name is Theodor Dannecker. He had sent the Jews of France to their death. He would send in the future the Jews of Italy to their death. And he comes to Bulgaria in order to prepare the deportation of the Bulgarian Jews. He meets with the Minister of Interior, and he meets with Alexander Belev. And he says to him, we want the Jews. In the first stage, we want to take the Jews from Thrace and Macedonia, who are about 11,400, 12,000, grosso modo. And Belev says to him, why only 12,000? Let's round the figure. We shall give you also 8,000 undesirable Jews from the old borders of Bulgaria. And then on the 22nd of February 1943, the unique agreement during the war in which one country agrees to give Germany its Jews is signed in Sofia. Bulgaria was the only country that signed an official agreement for the delivery of its Jews to Germany to be sent to Poland, to the eastern regions. And this agreement speaks at first of 20,000 Jews. The heading says 20,000 Jews from the new territories of Thrace and Macedonia. And during or after the signing ceremony between Belev from Bulgarian side and Dannecker from the German side, Belev takes out his pen and strikes off the line saying from the newly acquired territories of Thrace and Macedonia. And it becomes an agreement for the delivery of, at first, in the first stage, of 20,000 Jews from Bulgaria. And immediately the operation starts. The Bulgarian police and army and the agents of the Commissariat for Jewish Questions, very brutally and very cruelly, I must say, round up the Jews of Thrace and Macedonia and send them via Bulgaria to Poland, where they're sent directly to Treblinka. Out of 11,400 Jews, 100 came back after the war. That was a total annihilation of this population. And this is a stain on Bulgarian history. Although the king claimed that he was unable to prevent it because, I'm quoting, these were exiles from Hitler's military command. He didn't see himself as sovereign to prevent their deportation, perhaps. But anyway, he had approved of the signing of the agreement between Bulgaria and Germany, and at this stage he knew very well that, that this agreement includes also 8,000 Bulgarian Jews. And then a strange story starts. There is a small town in Bulgaria called Kyustendil, a very small town close to the Yugoslav border, about 15,000 people, about 1,000 Jews. One night, there is a party in the home of a local lawyer, Michael Bar-Zohar. It's a kind of corn husking party. And he invites all his friends from high school, and they sing, and they tell jokes, and they drink. And among all these people in his home, there are only two people wearing the yellow star, two Jewish people, a man named Buko Lazarov and his wife Anka. And in the middle of the party, the host comes to Lazarov, to this Jew, and says to him, listen, I threw this entire party just for one reason, to be able to talk to you without being noticed. I must tell you something which is very important. A few days ago, he says, a man from the Commissariat for Jewish Questions from Sofia came to see me and asked me, by my functions, to put at his disposal the tobacco warehouse of the town. I'm in charge of the government buildings in the town. And I asked, why do you want it? He said, I can't tell you, that's a secret. He says, if you don't tell me, you won't get it. So he finally decided to tell me the truth. He swore me to secrecy, and he said, we are going to pick up the Jews, to send them to Poland. We have signed an agreement with the Germans, and we are going to use the warehouse to concentrate the Jews over there before they go to the train station and board the trains to Poland. He said, I promise to keep it secret, but I can't hold it secret. You must do something. They're going to kill you. And that was the feeling from the start of Lazarov and all the other Jews who heard later this story. From the first moment, the Bulgarian Jews, when they were told there was going to be a deportation, knew they were going to die. Nobody believed for a moment that they're going to be relocated or sent somewhere else or to camps or to work. They knew they were going to their death. And try to imagine the Buko Lazarov, this Jew, walking late at night home with his wife, and thinking that in 5 days, it was the 4th of March, 1943, in 5 days they are going to be sent the night between the 9th and 10th of March, 1943, to their death. So the following day, he starts running around. They call some meetings at the synagogue. People are crying. They don't know what to do. That's the end. They are doomed. They go to see their Bulgarian friends. They cry. They ask for help. And the Bulgarians say, of course, we shall never let our Jewish brothers to be deported. Immediately, a group of people organizes in Kyustendil, and they decide to send a delegation to the capital, to Sofia, to try and cancel the deportation, which sounds like a very far-fetched idea. Who is going to listen to a group of people from this tiny town? 44 people signed for this delegation, which has to go to Sofia on the 8th of March, a day before the D-Day, before the deportation date. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when they meet at the train station of Kustendil, out of the 44, only 4 have remained. All the others have been pressured into canceling their participation. So tell me, my friends, when you have 4 people out of 44 who meet finally at the station, what do? You shake hands, you said, well, we tried, but there's nothing we can do, all 4 of us, and you go home. No. No way. They said, we are going to Sofia. The 4 of them board the train and decide to go. This is the moment when you see courage and devotion of people. They're going to fight the entire administration, the entire machine of Bulgarian government in order to try to save their Jewish co-citizens. They board the train, and when the train leaves Kustendil, they see on a side track the boxcars, which are already there waiting to pick up the Jews the following night. They arrive in Sofia late at night. The following morning, they go to see the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, a man named Dimitar Peshev, former Minister of Justice, a very brave and courageous man, a very fair man, who is also from this town, Kustendil. They tell him the story. He's stunned. He says, we cannot allow this thing to happen, because if that happens, this is going to be a stain on Bulgaria's forehead, which will be never washed. He goes to the parliament, and with a group of his colleagues, they just barge into the office of the Minister of Interior and confront him very strongly, threatening with a dramatic confrontation later, and asking to cancel immediately any plans of deportation. The minister is very, very deeply upset, because the entire story was based, because of the special qualities of and characteristics of Bulgaria, the entire deportation should have been carried out in utmost secrecy. And here he suddenly finds out that everybody knows about the Dannecker-Belev agreement, that there is a delegation from Kustendil in Sofia, and they are going to fight the deportation. He confers with the Prime Minister, who refuses to accept the delegation, and they go to see the king. We don't know if they did in the afternoon or in the morning, and then the king must take his responsibilities. Now, the king of Bulgaria was not a brave man. He was a rather fearful man, very hesitant, very kind of manipulative man who tried always to maneuver between the different possibilities, trying to procrastinate and gain time. But this time he had to decide. Now, he had 3 possible decisions in front of him. One was to say, we have no choice. We signed an agreement, we have to send the Jews. The second was, let's wait a couple of weeks, and then quietly we shall send them. But he chose the third possibility. And his order was, not one Bulgarian Jew leaves the country. 4 hours before deportation, the deportation is cancelled. The trains leave the stations empty. All over Bulgaria, not one Jew is put aboard a train. In several towns, Jews were arrested by the police and brought to schoolyards or warehouses because they didn't get the cancellation orders on time. And they got them only later in the following morning. Now, for instance, in the 2nd largest city in Bulgaria, Plovdiv, the Jews, the eminent Jews, about 600 or 700 of them, were concentrated in the schoolyard of a school, in the yard of a school. And the head of the church at this place, the Metropolitan Kirill, heard about the story and immediately went to find the Jews. When he tried to get into the schoolyard, there were 2 police officers at the gate who barred his way and said, sorry, Father, you cannot come in. He said, I cannot come in? Watch me. And in front of everybody, he climbed the fence, jumped inside the school. The Jews flocked around him, and he said, don't you worry. We're not going to let you go. We shall do everything possible to save you. And he used this phrase from the Bible, from the book of Ruth, wherever you go, I go. And then he sent a telegram to the court asking for the Jews to be liberated. And what the third thing he did, he went to the police chief of Plovdiv and told him, please inform the government. Until now, I was a law-abiding citizen. I'm a Bulgarian citizen, and I believe in keeping the law. But starting at this moment, and for the future, I shall refuse to obey the Bulgarian laws, and I shall listen only to my conscience, because I cannot accept to, in any way, a government which does not abide by the laws of man and nature. And when this message came to Sofia, sent by one of the princes of the Bulgarian church, you can imagine that it created quite a lot of turmoil. In these following days, there were also several other developments. Alexander Belev immediately resigned from office as Commissar for Jewish Questions. He was later convinced to stay. The church immediately presented a very strong protest to the court. And for the first time, the role of a woman, a young woman, became known to a very small circle of people. That's also one of the strange parts of the story. Alexander Belev had, like in the movies, a very beautiful and very attractive secretary. Her name was Lili Panitsa. She was really a gorgeous woman. She was 27 years old at the time. And beside being his secretary, she was also madly in love with him. She was obsessed by him, actually. And they had a secret love affair. But she was also a woman of great moral fiber. She couldn't stand the fact that what she was doing in his office, it was an act of evil, of sending people to their death. So she would type all day these secret deportation orders. She would spend time with her lover. And at night, she would run to the homes of the leaders of the Jewish community and warn them of the forthcoming deportation, and even advise them how to act in order to prevent it. Try to imagine the dilemma, the quandary of this young woman who is torn between her loyalty to the state, to what she's doing, between her love to the men in her life, and between her moral principles, which were the strongest of all. And she risked everything, her job, her love, her life, by running to warn the Jewish people. So the first attempt of deportation was cancelled. Peshev, though, the deputy speaker of the parliament, who succeeded in this first step, was not sure that everything has reached an end. Therefore, he decided to write a petition to the prime minister. I think this petition must be taught in schools today. It's a wonderful document of people rising for noble ideals and refusing to accept the deportation and the hurting of other human beings. He wrote this letter to Filov, to Prime Minister Filov, demanding that the Jews would not be deported, and saying, I and my members, my colleagues from Parliament would never accept this kind of step, and we shall never approve it, and the responsibility is going to be only yours. He went and in 48 hours had about 43 signatures on this document. 43 was about 40% of the majority group in the Bulgarian parliament. I speak about a pro-fascist majority. He intentionally did not accept any signatures from members of the opposition or for people who were not identified with the pro-German policy of the government. So this was all signed by pro-fascist members of parliament. And this petition was handed to the prime minister, who exploded with fury. This was a rebellion. And try to think, in Europe in 1943, in the Nazi sphere of influence, 43 members of parliament daring to give such a petition to the prime minister. Filov called immediately for a meeting in which Peshev was stripped from all his functions and kicked out of his position as deputy speaker of the parliament. And that was for him the end, and the end actually of his activity in this particular affair. 3 days later, the king was urgently summoned to Berchtesgaden to meet with Hitler. Now, the Eagle's Nest was in Berchtesgaden in Bavaria, and Hitler and von Ribbentrop waited for Boris to arrive. And I guess they played the role of what we call vulgarly of good cop and bad cop. Hitler was all smiles and gentility, and von Ribbentrop just took Boris aside and say, why don't you send your Jews to Poland? And King Boris said to him, first of all, he said, our Jews are Spanish Jews. They are different from your Jews. They don't play the same role that your Jews play in your society. The answer of Ribbentrop was, a Jew is a Jew all the same. Why don't you send them to Poland? There is one solution for the Jewish question, and this is the final solution. To what King Boris said, look, I'm ready to send some Bolshevik communist elements to Poland, which he never did. But I need my Jews for road construction in Bulgaria. I cannot send them. That was the record of the conversation. He came back to Bulgaria. 3 days later, he called Filov and Gabrovsky, and we have a record of this meeting. And he told them very clearly, we are going now to mobilize all the able Jewish men in Bulgaria and send them to labor camps. And by doing that, we shall prevent sending the Jews to Poland. That was the clearest expression of his plan and the clearest declaration about the new direction of his policy, which had started on the 9th of March 1943. Now you would say, okay, take the men, so what about the women and children? And that was exactly because he knew that by doing that, he's going to scuttle the policy of the German government, which was to clean any country completely of its Jewish population. They would never take only the women or only the men. When they carried out the final solution, it was taking away everybody. So the moment the men were working in roads, they couldn't take anybody. Do you think that this bluff succeeded to work? No way. The Germans immediately understood what it was all about. And we saw the Gestapo and SS reports from Bulgaria saying they're bluffing. They're doing all this road construction story just in order to prevent the Jews to being sent to Poland. And these labor camps are not that tiresome. People are not working very hard. We know what means to be in a labor camp. But they couldn't do anything because that was the decision. I must tell you very frankly, most of Bulgarian men were sent to these camps and they worked during the war. My father was also sent to one of these camps. In many camps, in several camps, we had cases of sadism or brutality by the commanding officers, like in every military camp in every part of the world. But not even one Bulgarian Jew died in one of those camps. What kind of labor camp, and that's what I asked you at the beginning, forget about the Holocaust. Because in what labor camp, which you know about, would you have people getting furloughs at the end of the week to go to see their families? Or if his mother is sick, they got a furlough. My father was escaping regularly every weekend and coming home. My mother was crazy. She said, they're going to do to you something. And they would take a batch of photographs from his pocket. Photographs, by the way, taken by the closest photographer in the closest town to the camp, in which you'll see the Jews working in the camp, sometimes drinking together with their guards, and having a kind of smiles on their face and looking very well, I must say. They looked more like in a kind of summer camp than in a hard labor facility. And the fact is that they were sent home and back several times. They were sent home for 2-3 months and then mobilized again. And up to the end of the war, this prevented the Jews from being sent to Germany. But the Germans did not give up. In May 1943, they decided a second attempt. This time, Peshev was not there. That's why I said the role of Peshev was very important in the first deportation. But the second deportation, it was on the 20th of May 1943. And this time, Belev decided to go all the way. And Belev prepared a plan together with Dannecker, saying, let's send all the 50,000 Bulgarian Jews straight to Poland. It's very strange, but the Jews heard about it some time ago by Liliana Panizza, who came to warn them that orders were being printed and very soon they were going to be deported out of Sofia. They tried to find help. This time, as I said, Peshev was not there. So they didn't know to whom to turn. And on the 24th of May, a very dramatic confrontation took place. The 24th of May was the day when the deportation was supposed to start. All the Jews of Sofia got orders to be ready to go to the train stations at certain times to board the trains with their families. There was a lot of crying. They had to give up away their property. Peasants from the nearby villages came to buy it for peanuts. And they had a big meeting in the synagogue. People were crying. They felt once again doomed. And then a delegation of the Sofia rabbis, of the two rabbis, went to see the head of the Church of Sofia, the Metropolitan Stefan, who was the man who had in the past already shown a very courageous attitude against the deportation of the Jews. They came to his house, and now, like a great director of Hollywood had prepared the entire story, the 24th of May is a very important Bulgarian holiday. It's the holiday of learning and culture, the Saint Cyril and Methodius Day, Saint Kirill and Methodi Day. These are the two priests who invented the Cyrillic alphabet. And on this day, there is a huge rally in the main square of Sofia by the Alexander Nevsky enormous cathedral, where the head of the church, Metropolitan Stefan, speaks to thousands and scores of thousands of students about learning and culture. He makes a prayer, and they paraded from there. They used to parade to the king's palace, where the king would salute them, and then parade through the street of Sofia. So this 24th of May, everything was ready for the parade. It was a glorious sunny day, and Stefan was already on his way to the rally when suddenly he sees the delegation of the rabbis of Sofia. He takes off his hat and his gold embroidered vestments, and he says to them, what happens? And they told him the story. They're going to be deported and they're going to be sent away. He said, don't worry, we shall never allow that to happen. He immediately contacted the king's palace and sent a very strong message of protest. Then he sent also a message via Mrs. Karavelova, the widow of one of the greatest prime ministers of Bulgaria in the past. And he went himself to the rally in St. Alexander Nevsky Square. And when he spoke, it was a very dramatic speech, because he started by saying, today is a sad day and somebody is missing here. He said, every year we have this celebration with our Jewish students participating in our rally. But today they are not here. And they are not here because somebody is carrying out an act of discrimination against them. They are being discriminated and persecuted. And we should never accept persecution, discrimination against a minority of our population. Now, the moment while he was speaking, the entire cabinet was sitting behind him on the podium. You could imagine Bogdan Filov and Peter Gabrovsky listening to this prelate speaking actually against their policy. And at the end of the meeting, Filov confronted very angrily Metropolitan Stefan. He said, don't you mix in politics. This is not of your business. And Stefan said, I'm going to mix because this is not a question of politics, but of sheer humanity and of religion, and I'm going to continue to do it. And they sent about 3 messages to the king that day and continued to fight the measures of the Bulgarian government. What Filov did not know is that also the Metropolitan had also advised the Jewish population of the town, of the city of Sofia, to go and protest in the streets against deportation. And that's what happened. Could you imagine once again another country in Europe during the war where a Jewish protest is taking place? And there were 2 parades walking the street that morning. On one hand, the parade of St. Cyril and Methodius Day through the streets of Sofia. And on the other hand, you had the Jewish, bitter, desperate protest trying to reach the king's palace and to ask to stay in Bulgaria. They were stopped by the police, mounted police, and by the agents of the Commissariat for Jewish Questions, beaten. About 400 of them were arrested, including one of the rabbis. The other rabbi, the Rabbi Hananel, succeeded to hide for the night Some say in the home of Metropolitan Stefan. Another version says that he slept in his mother's home. The following day he was arrested and brought to Belev. And Belev was furious. Belev yelled at him like crazy, to the point that at a certain point, the rabbi said, listen, Mr. Belev, this country is yours as well as it is mine. I have fought for this country. I'm wearing the highest order for valor, courage in Bulgaria. And I fought for this country and spilled my blood for this country. This is also my country. And then Belev told him something which Rabbi Hananel did not understand at the first moment. He said to him, if you didn't have friends in high places, I would have sent you to Germany, not to Poland. Now get out of here. And he went out of there. And only in the street it dawned upon him the real meaning of what Belev was saying. You have friends in high places, and I cannot send you to Poland. And that was the real message. What the Jews did not know until that very moment is that already 4 days before, on the 20th of May 1943, their fate had been sealed in a positive way, because that day, Gabrovsky, the Minister of Interior, had gone to the king to ask for his approval of the plan to deport the Jews to Poland. It's very funny, but at the last moment, before Gabrovsky went with the plan, the Germans, the Nazis, had doubts about the success of this plan. So they stopped Belev at the last moment and told him, before you submit your plan to Gabrovsky, let's prepare a fallback plan, a fallback line. So if the king says no to this plan, at least we shall have something in order not to lose face. So they prepared very hastily a plan called Plan B. Plan A was the deportation of the Jews to Poland right away. Plan B was the deportation of the Jews from Sofia to the provinces inside Bulgaria. And Gabrovsky took the plan from Belev. He went to the king, and the king immediately told him, Plan A I don't accept Plan A. If you want to evacuate the Jews to the provinces, okay. And Plan B was accepted and implemented. Now the king, immediately after rejecting Plan A, which was approved by the cabinet the following Plan B was approved by the cabinet the following day, the king immediately got into his car and escaped to one of his hideouts in the mountains at Chamkoria, in the mountains where he went hid with the hunter and his driver for 3 days, because he had this kind of talent to vanish whenever he feared that pressure was going to be exerted upon him. And he feared very much that he was going to get a phone call or a telegram from Berlin that could force him to send the Jews, and he wanted to avoid that. So he vanished from Sofia for a few days, which made for many years the communist regime years later claimed that he had escaped in order not to save the Jews of Bulgaria. Only later, when he found out exactly when his order to cancel Plan A was given, did we understand what was the sequence of events. And indeed, from the 24th to the 28th of May 1943, the Jews of Sofia were evacuated to the provinces. Their life was not very nice. They had lots of problems, but all of them, without exception, survived. The king was again summoned to Berchtesgaden and called to Germany again in August of 1943. In the meantime, the church continued to fight, especially Metropolitan Stefan, to the point that at one day, Gabrovsky ordered all of the churches in Sofia to be locked, to be closed. It turned out that Metropolitan Stefan decided perhaps he can save the Jews of Bulgaria by christening them en masse. So he opened the churches for christening. He said, I don't care for what reason. Let them come, be Christian. They become Christians, they cannot be deported. So they tried to stop him, saying, we are going to deport even those who are Christian. He said, okay, I'm writing that in my next circular letter, which I'm going to send to all the parishes, which was, of course, what they didn't want, but he did it. He sent to all the parishes the letter asking the priests to warn the Jews that even if they are Christian, they are going to be sent to Poland. That made the government even more angry, and that's why Gabrovsky ordered to close all the churches in Sofia. To what Metropolitan Stefan replied, "This is an illegal order. I am here to serve the people and serve the religion. I am keeping the churches open." And 2 hours later, he got a phone call saying that the order was cancelled. And finally, they even tried to indict Metropolitan Stefan because of acting against the law for the defense of the nation and sabotaging the anti-Jewish policy of the state. Nothing came out of this indictment, of course. The king was called to Germany for the last time in August. At that time, at the same day he came to see Hitler, the third attempt of deportation was carried out, but this time it did not reach any stage of execution. Because this time the German ambassador to Sofia, Beckerle, wrote back saying, "Forget about it. These people are not going to deliver their Jews." So they even didn't try this time to send the Jews to Poland. The king met with Hitler for the last time in Rastenburg in East Prussia, where the advanced headquarters of the German army were. And there they had a very unpleasant, very tough confrontation. Because this time, Hitler asked Boris to send the Bulgarian army to fight against the Russian on the Eastern Front. And Boris refused, claiming that Bulgaria had been saved by the Russians and liberated by the Russians, and no Bulgarian soldier would fight against Russia. That put Hitler into a tremendous rage, according to the king's account afterwards. But I want to tell you, it's not only that the king refused. Do you know, can you imagine that during all these years, when Bulgaria was an ally of Nazi Germany, when Bulgaria was actually swarming with German soldiers, with SS officers, with Gestapo agents, Bulgaria refused to break diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, the Soviet embassy continued to function in Sofia during all this period. Could you imagine something more absurd than that when the king in the evening would go to his balcony to take some fresh air, he would see on the left the German embassy with the swastika floating over the building, and on the right, the red banner flying over the Russian embassy. Could you imagine all the headaches of all these people from the foreign ministry when they had to whisk one ambassador out and the other ambassador in during diplomatic functions and cocktails for them not to meet each other, the Russians and the Germans? But until the end of the war, Bulgaria kept her diplomatic relations with Russia, and not one Bulgarian soldier fought in the Second World War. They succeeded to avoid it. The king came back from his last meeting with Hitler. 8 days later, he died in a very mysterious way. We don't know until today. The official documents speak about a heart attack. But the doctors who took care of the king were 2 Austrian professors and 1 German professor from Berlin. And when they met with Ambassador Beckerle and with the air attaché of Germany in the embassy, they testified that the king's death had all the signs and symptoms of what they call a typical Balkanic death. They claimed that he was poisoned. And one of the doctors claimed that he had exactly the same symptoms like the Prime Minister of Greece, Metaxas, who had been also murdered a year before. So until today, we don't know if the king died really from a heart attack, from exhaustion, from the terrible emotions he suffered when he met with Hitler, or he was poisoned. If he were poisoned, there is one reason which seems to be a very, very tangible one. At that period, there were very persistent rumors circulating in Berlin that Bulgaria was carrying out secret negotiations with the Allies in Istanbul in order to sign a separate peace. So, differently from my colleagues who believe that King Boris was murdered because they wanted to punish him for his policy, First of all, don't murder somebody to punish him. Second, if you murder somebody to punish him, then his successor is going to carry out the policy which this one did not want to. I think if he were murdered, it was for one simple reason. They wanted to prevent him from signing a separate peace with the Allies, which did not happen. The king died in August. His infant son, Simeon, who was 6 years old, became the king with the Regents' Council. A new government was created in Sofia. Filov, the prime minister, became one of the regents of the king, of course approved by Berlin. And in September, the new Minister of Interior called all the regional directors of Bulgaria to a meeting and told them, we have now to find a way to alleviate the life of the Jews. We failed to deport them. We shall not be deporting them anymore. And wherever they are, there they shall stay. On September 9, 1944, the Soviet army liberated Bulgaria. And it turned out that not one Jew had been deported. 50,000 Bulgarian Jews were saved. Bulgaria became the country from which not even one Jew was sent to Poland, and the only country in the Nazi sphere of influence where the Jewish population grew in numbers during the Second World War. This was the end of that story. It had some very strange sequels. The communist regime afterwards immediately arrested the leaders of the former regime. There were several trials. There were also quite a lot of random executions in the streets after the entry of the Russian forces. Belev had vanished. Liliana Panizza was arrested by the communists, beaten, tortured for months after months because they were trying to get from her the address of her lover. Where did he vanish? Where did he go? And she really did not know. She was brought to trial together with all the senior officials of the Commissariat of Jewish Questions. And in a very dramatic appearance before the tribunal, a Jewish delegation came and said, "You're trying her? She saved our lives." And she was finally acquitted, but following the beatings and the torture, she died a year later. She was 30 years old when she died. For many years, people didn't know what had happened to Belev, to the Commissar Alexander Belev. It turned out that he tried to escape to the west, and he was captured on the same train station in Kyustendil, where everything had started, where the first delegation of 4 had started on their way. There he was identified by a group of freedom fighters, of partisans, who captured him, identified him. He had a large sum of money in his possession. And then they made a big mistake. They gave him to a Jew, a member of their group, and they told the Jew, "You will escort him to Sofia for trial." He said, "Sure, of course." And they just waited for them to turn the corner, and they shot him and threw him into a ditch where he was left to rot for many years. The others were judged, tried, and some of them were executed, like Filov and Gabrovsky. Things turned out that the communist Bulgarian regime decided to take on itself a large part of the credit for saving the Bulgarian Jews, and they created a wonderful legend about Todor Zhivkov, the future president of Bulgaria, who had instigated the protest of the 24th of May, and by doing that saved the Jews. It turned to be completely false. I interviewed Zhivkov before his death and found out that it was a bunch of lies. Most of the Bulgarian Jews went to Israel, about 95% of them. The Bulgarians themselves were very deeply hurt. And I remember personally when they would come to the clinic of my father and say, "Doctor, why are you leaving? What happened?" And he would say, "We want to have our own country." And they would say, "But this is your country. Bulgaria is your country." And I remember the first years after we left for Israel, they felt like betrayed by the Jewish population because they were very close to them. Today they said we were smart to go to Israel finally. After all, life in Israel today is a little bit better than it was in Bulgaria. And the Jews of Bulgaria conquered Jaffa. They all settled in Jaffa in Israel. And it became the only Bulgarian city outside the Bulgarian borders, with signs in the street in Bulgarian, with newspapers in Bulgarian. The translation in the movies was in Bulgarian. There was a Bulgarian Jewish choir, Sadikov, and even a Bulgarian soccer team, Maccabi Jaffa, in which your obedient servant did not play a very glorious role, trying to kick the ball anyway. And when, in 1980, Simeon, the king in exile now, came to Bulgaria for a bar mitzvah, he was taken in a car, in an open car, to the streets of Jaffa. And he saw these crowds, he saw the signs in Bulgarian, and the crowds shouting, "Long live the king." And he said, for the first time since I was exiled from Bulgaria, I feel a king again. And every year, on the 9th of March 1943, we celebrate our rescue. There is always a Bulgarian delegation which comes to Israel. The president of the state, the prime minister, and members of the Knesset are always there. And we celebrate our gratitude to Bulgaria for saving her Jews during these terrible times. So to conclude, there are three lessons which we should learn from this story. The first, it's a beautiful story of human devotion and courage, of people who acted against all their best interests in order to save their fellow human beings. Be it the princes of the church, be it Liliana Panizza, be it the members of the parliament, the pro-fascist members of the parliament, be it even King Boris. They all acted against their interests by saving the Jews. The second lesson is a very sad one. It proves to us that if people wanted to stand up to Hitler, they could have done that. In all the cases where they tried, they succeeded. The Italians, until they were conquered by the Germans in 1943, succeeded to save Jews in their country, and they were the only ones who saved Jews outside of their borders as well, in Croatia, in Greece, in France. And we know about the Danish rescue, which was also very dramatic, and which is proof that if people really wanted to stand up and fight for their fellow human beings, they could have saved them. The third lesson is for the future. It shows us how a small country, which was just a bite for Hitler, could have occupied Bulgaria in 2 hours, could have crushed it. In spite of their being small and weak, they decided, fearfully, hesitating, but they did it. They decided to stand up and to fight for their Jewish citizens, which proves and teaches us for the future never to give up and never to give in and never to resign ourselves when we see that a minority's right or individual rights are being trampled, are being broken. We should never say we cannot do anything, that's the way it goes, that's life. No, that's not life. We can fight and we can prevent it from happening, and these are the moments when small groups of people who have courage, who have noble feelings and have devotion can make even a small David become a Goliath. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Bar-Zohar. We're running short on time, but I do want to leave an appropriate amount of time for questions and comments from the audience. If you would just raise your hands, I will recognize you, and then you can ask your question, and Professor Bar-Zohar will answer.
Thank you for a very moving lecture. I'm curious about the difference in the reaction to the Jewish deportations in different parts of the Balkans. In neighboring Albania, for example, this very small Jewish community was also saved and allowed to immigrate to Israel after the war. However, in Thessaloniki, nearby Greece, the entire Jewish population was deported. And what accounts for the difference in this part of the world, in the Balkans and the former Ottoman Empire?
Albania was for a long period under Italian occupation, and that's the entire secret. The Italians were just marvelous during the war. There were, in many ways, you can see a very interesting similarity between the Italians and the Bulgarians in their attitude. The Italian army tried to prevent the deportation from Croatia, saving quite a few Jews. They tried to prevent the deportation from Greece, saving quite a few Jews. They prevented the deportation from south of France. And when the Italian army went back into Italy at the end of the war, many Jewish refugees came with them. So the Italians were very important here. The problem is that Saloniki was under the German rule, and they took everybody. Yes, sir.
Would you say something about the other minorities involved, in particular the Gypsies? And then also, could you say something about the question of the Communist Party? Although you noted that anti-Semitism in its forms that were used in Germany were not prevalent in Bulgaria, I'm curious as to the extent to which the Bulgarian population viewed Jews as associated with the Communist Party.
Okay. The first question was about the other minorities. They were not touched. There was no extermination of any other minority. The minorities in Bulgaria were left where they were, the Gypsies as well. They were never rounded up or sent to ghettos or to camps. As far as the communist influence, the official propaganda of the government was that the Jews are agents either of the communists or of the Anglo-Americans. They use it very often in their propaganda. We don't have any proof that this succeeded to strike roots in the Bulgarian society. It was viewed as propaganda. Now, the Communist Party itself played a very positive role in trying to help the Jews by broadcasts, by distributing leaflets and papers, but they were just unable to help very much because they were small and didn't have any means in their power. There were a few Bulgarian members of the parliament who were communists, and the moment Bulgaria signed the tripartite pact, they were all put into detention camps. So they couldn't really help. But I wouldn't say that the Bulgarian population, in general, except for the lunatic fringe on the right, saw the Jews as depicted by the official propaganda as agents of the Russians or of the Anglo-Americans. Yes, sir.
As I understand it, there were some 11 or 12,000 deportations in areas that were contiguous to Bulgaria or attached to Bulgaria by the Nazis, but still were part of Bulgaria, but not part of traditional Bulgaria. Could you say a word about those deportations and why they happened as opposed to the failure of the deportations inside Bulgaria? And let me play devil's advocate on one point, and if you just respond to it. In an earlier study of this subject by Professor Chary, he has a slightly more, I don't want to say skeptical, but he believes that the role of the king was influenced by the changing fortunes in the war, and that because by the mid-1943 it began to appear that the Germans were not going to win the war, that sort of boosted his courage, whereas if things had been going differently, the implication is that he might have acted differently. Could you comment on that?
Sure. First of all, I think you came a little bit late. Yes, we spoke about the deportation of Thrace and Macedonia, but if anybody wants to, we spoke about it, I think, quite in detail. And we spoke about the dark role which Bulgaria played in this deportation, which should not be concealed. That was a bad thing. And Bulgaria accepts the responsibility for that today.
Can you explain why the difference? Why
yes. That was they were not Bulgarian citizens, and Bulgaria claimed. I believe that Bulgaria should have at least tried to save them. Many people accused the king for not trying to save them. The king claimed that they were deported because they were subject, I would quote exactly, exiles from Hitler's military command. The king knew very well that Thrace and Macedonia did not belong to Bulgaria. I don't accept this attitude, but I must tell you that, very frankly, nobody else tried to save them. The Bulgarian Jews never tried to do anything. They knew they saw the trains passing through their territory. Nobody tried to organize a delegation. The Bulgarian elite saw them as foreigners who were not Bulgarians. Perhaps you can say, well, look, the Italians did. The Italians did. But the Bulgarians did not do that. The second question about Professor Chari, I don't like to speak about my colleagues, but let me give you some dates, okay? Stalingrad, I read his book and I used it in quite a few places. The Battle of Stalingrad, which was the turning point of the war, took place on the 2nd of February 1943. The 3rd of February was marked by radio broadcasts and ceremonies of mourning throughout the German Empire. 20 days later, on 22nd of February, Bulgaria signed an agreement to deport their Jews to Germany. And only on the 9th of March did the king decide to stop deportation. Now, somebody should explain to somebody as limited as I am, how come that after the change in the course of the war, the king signs an agreement? Why did he sign it? If that was the reason, so he should have told Belev, don't sign any agreements. Don't deport anybody. But all of a sudden, on the 9th of March, he decides to change the Bulgaria's policy because of the pressure from within. So all these scholars who claim that Stalingrad and the change of the course of the war caused Bulgaria not to deport their Jews should rather brush up their history, I'm afraid. They haven't read the history correctly. Yes, please.
I must take exception with your explanation to the last question. Stalingrad happened in February, you say early February. Don't you think that when a major debacle occurs, for it to filter down to other countries and to the policy of those countries to change as a result of it, it takes time. It takes a lot of time.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the king already registered in his mind that, oh, God, something is happening. Let me see what will happen again. At the moment, I cannot refuse because they're still strong and they're present in my country. But in the future, let's see.
So let me go with your reasoning,
Yeah.
sir. So what happens after Stalingrad? Nothing happens. They signed the agreement. The Jews of Thrace and Macedonia are deported. And we come to the 9th of March. What happened on the 9th of March that made the king suddenly change his mind and change the agreement which was signed with Germany? No, a moment, no fight, no any development on the battlefields, but the pressure from within. That the only thing...
The Peshev action in Parliament, which...
Please, I know the story.
Scandal, a threat of a scandal, and the king had to do it because he felt that there were 43 signatures.
No, the signatures were not there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The signatures came about...
I happen to be the son of the lawyer of Dimitar Peshev, so allow me to know...
Excuse me, sir. I know who you are, but the 43 signatures came 3 weeks later. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Brush up your history. The 43 signatures came at the end of the month of March. We are speaking about the 9th of March. That day, on the 9th of March, where you say very rightly so, Dimitar Peshev goes to the Minister of Interior and starts the entire operation, right? And what happens then? The king decides not to deport the Jews, not because of the debacle on the battlefields, because if that had caused it, it would have caused it before or after, but not at that particular day. It's true, that's what we said before, that on that day, when Peshev came to the minister, and when he was asked, the king had the choice between 3 decisions. One was to honor his agreement, which is very consistent with your logic. You say in the future it would change. The second one was to delay the deportation. The third one was to cancel it. And if he didn't do it like that, why did Alexander Belev submit his resignation? Why the entire Commissariat for Jewish Questions was like a beehive that day? Because the king had forced them to cancel this policy. And only the ultra-fascist Nazis or pro-Nazis in Bulgaria succeeded to convince finally Belev to stay on his position. So I believe that on this day, 9th of March 1943, Dimitar Peshev had a very important role by triggering that and by forcing the king to come to his senses. And on that day, not before, not after, on the 9th of March 1943, the turn in the king's policy took place, and from that day until his death, he carried out a very, very clear pro-Jewish policy. Now, I would like also to warn all of us, there is not one person who saved all the Jews of Bulgaria. This is neither the king, neither Metropolitan Stefan, nor Peshev. The entire Bulgarian nation and the Bulgarian society, by these leaders, stopped the deportation. And that's why our gratitude is to a much larger number of elements. Not one of them stopped Hitler. All of them stopped Hitler. Yes, please, Mr. Bar-Zohar.
I would like to use the last sentence of Professor Bar-Zohar. Now, there are questions why, in the one case, it was successful, why not? Because on the one side was a government of some kind, on the other was the Bulgarian nation. Now, it's absolutely amazing to imagine how people who hated the guts of each other, to the extent to which, for example, Bishop Kirill and Bishop Stefan hated each other, or to the extent to which Rajko Alexiev, the journalist who was later killed by the communists because of his democratic views, as a matter of fact, passing through the same people's courts, so-called, which claimed to be punishing the Nazis, but was not doing exactly that. I mean, he was all the time in a very huge conflict on the pages of his papers with some of the people who went arm in arm to sign the petitions and to demonstrate and to stop this thing. I mean, it's amazing how this was a matter of human feelings on the one hand. And on the other, and this is what you actually mentioned, Professor Bar-Zohar, it couldn't have happened if Bulgaria as a country was not a country with the intact or partly intact democratic institutions. Probably the only one in the field of influence of Germany in Europe, because those who were invaded have given up their institutions. Those who were pro-German have actually given up even earlier and voluntarily. Can you imagine, for example, in a communist country, or in one of the typical fascist countries, the Speaker of Parliament going there to ask the Minister of the Interior to stop this, and the Minister of the Interior pay any attention to this? Can you imagine it? Can you imagine the moral impact of a priest or a bishop who is claiming that this is ahuman, and the so-called leaders paying any attention to this? Can you imagine the opposition in Parliament in having an opinion in these kind of situations, not to mention a good part of the ruling majority expressing such an opinion? I mean, the institutions were somehow presented. I think we should not forget this, because after all, we all think of how this thing should never, ever happen again. And the maintenance of the democratic institutions is one of the factors which made it possible for fascists to act, which made it possible for the intellectuals and for the common people to get out there and state their position, which made it possible even for the king to oppose the machine of Hitler, because, for goodness sake, however he was determined by the end, however a development he has went through, I don't know, I'm not the researcher, I don't know what that affected, but I believe he passed through this human development. Imagine how, in a totalitarian country, this could have been effective. No way. No way. So, the institutions on the one hand, and naturally, the attitude of the nation, with all the heroes who were there, with Peshev and with the other people who stood, with Kirill, who said that over my dead corpse, you'll move these people out, and so on. But the heroes in the nation, because the solitary heroes would have done nothing for them.
I would like to add two short sentences to what the ambassador Dimitrov said right now. One is that finally, those who like it or don't like it, the final decision had to be made by the king. The final decision do we send the Jews or not, had to be made by the king. You can find all the reasons in the world. But finally, he was the one who could have approved of Plan A. He was the one who could have sent the Jews on the 9th of March. He did not do it. And the second reason, there is today in Bulgaria, like in many other countries, a debate, very heated debate between the two camps, the ones who love the king and the ones who hate the king, the ones who love the communists and the ones who hate the king. They are fighting so hard for the last 50 years that I think at a certain point they don't care very much about what really happened as long as their debate continues. I suggest to all of us to take this wonderful saying from which is a very wise one, to say, let's look at the bottom line. What does the bottom line show? The bottom line shows two events. One, that not a Jew was taken out of pro-Nazi Bulgaria to the crematoriums, and the second, that the Jewish community grew in numbers. All the rest doesn't matter because the result, these are the facts. And that's the unique case when it could happen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies. Speaking today will be Professor Michael Bar-Zohar. Professor Bar-Zohar is a professor of history at Emory University. He's the author of many books, and I remember still as a teenager having bought a paperback copy of his first book, The Hunt for German Scientists. And he's written numerous books in the intervening 3 decades, among them L'Oreal, Nazis, and the Arab Boycott, and Ben-Gurion, a biography. His most recent book is, as I mentioned earlier, Beyond Hitler's Grasp, The Heroic Rescue of Bulgaria's Jews, which Professor Bar-Zohar not only brings his writing and scholarly talents to, but his special emotional connection as a Bulgarian Jew himself. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Bar-Zohar.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for mentioning my books. I must say that I read them all and I enjoyed them tremendously. When I speak about the Bulgarian rescue, and I know that I speak before scholars like you and people who know very much about the Holocaust, I have to ask you to forget about the Holocaust. This is a different story. You won't hear about death camps and death marches and ghettos. This is a story which strangely happened in a different sphere, in a different world. First of all, Bulgaria. Bulgaria is situated, as most of you know, south of Romania and the Danube River. Its eastern border is the Black Sea. The western border was Yugoslavia. On the south, Turkey and Greece. Bulgaria was a revisionist state between the 2 world wars. She wanted to recuperate territories she had lost during the First World War. She wanted to take Thrace back from Greece, Macedonia from Yugoslavia, and the fertile plain of Dobruja from Romania. When the Second World War approached, Bulgaria knew very well that the Allies would never help her to get these territories. The Soviet Union would never dismember Yugoslavia. Great Britain would never dismember Greece. And the only possible power to help Bulgaria to recuperate these territories turned to be Germany, Nazi Germany, which was also a revisionist state, which had no feelings or close interests in Greece or Yugoslavia, and it could pressure the Romanians to do what Bulgaria wanted. And indeed, In early 1939, a conference was held in Vienna, hosted by Hitler, in which finally Romania agreed to give back to Bulgaria the plain of Dobruja in the north. That was a big reason for big rejoicement in Bulgaria. Streets were named after Hitler and Mussolini, and Germany turned to look as the best ally Bulgaria could dream about. When the war started, Bulgaria tried to play for a while the role of a neutral country, but she was very quickly drawn toward the German sphere of interests. And then, in 1940, Bulgaria joined the tripartite pact with Germany, and German troops came into Bulgaria. Finally, they carried out from Bulgaria 2 very dramatic and very powerful offensives against Greece and against Yugoslavia, which lasted only a few weeks. And after these offensives, all of a sudden, Bulgaria found herself being handed Thrace, which she coveted for so long, from Greece, and being handed Macedonia from the Ethiopians, for instance, or Iraqis, or whatever. Whoever is not Ashkenazi is a Sephardi. That's not true. The Sephardi Jews were actually a rather small group of people who, when they were exiled from Spain in 1492, they decided to accept the call from Sultan Bayezid of Turkey, the emperor of the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, who invited the Jews expelled from Spain to come and give him and his kingdom their expertise and their knowledge. And a few of the Jews who were expelled agreed and went and settled down in Turkey, Greece, southern Yugoslavia, and Bulgaria. This was the base of the pure Sephardi, pure Spanish Jews. Some of them later migrated to Italy and to Holland. But the Spanish Jews who went to this part of the world spoke the Spanish language and kept it actually until today. What they call the Ladino, the Spanish language, the Spanish songs, the Spanish romanceros. I was put to bed when I was a child by lullabies in ancient Spanish, which were sung by my grandmother. They passed from one family to the other. And these Spanish Jews, especially in Bulgaria, I must admit, were not very, very religious. We knew we were Jewish. We were very proud of being Jewish. We did not exactly observe all the Jewish rules and regulations. We didn't celebrate very fervently the Jewish holidays. Many of us did not know what Yom Kippur was or even what Shabbat was. We didn't know what kosher was. I had never seen in Bulgaria a Jew with a skull cap at the yarmulke in the street. I had never seen a man with a beard or side locks. And I had very rarely seen Ashkenazi Jews. Actually, we had about 5% of the Bulgarian Jews were very strange people. They had names like Rosenberg, Leibowitz, Lieberman, Horowitz, and we used to call them Tedescus or Chaldeos, which are 2 ancient names for Germany. And it was very strange. I remember I asked now destroyed and dismembered Yugoslavia. For Bulgaria, that was the achievement of a dream. King Boris of Bulgaria became the king unifier. Bulgaria became Greater Bulgaria, having achieved everything she wanted without having to fire a single bullet. Not one Bulgarian soldier had participated so far in the war. I would say that there was a difference between Dobruja in the north and Thrace in Macedonia. Dobruja, which was given to Bulgaria by Romania, was accepted by the entire world as being a part of Bulgaria now. So it was completely integrated into Bulgaria. Thrace and Macedonia were officially annexed to Bulgaria or reunited with Bulgaria. Actually, it was only under Bulgarian administration. There was no a representation in the Bulgarian parliament of any members of parliament from Thrace or Macedonia, and the local mayors and chiefs of police and other administration positions were all sent from Bulgaria proper, what they called Old Bulgaria, the old boundaries of Bulgaria. But there was a price to be paid for this help and this support from Germany. And the price, as always, was the Jewish population. And Bulgaria passed several laws and edicts which were about to harm the Jewish population. But before I go into that, I would like to tell you something about the Bulgarian Jews. Bulgaria was a country, during the war, it was about 6.5 million in population. The Bulgarian Jews were about 50,000, less than 1%. A very strange kind of people. First of all, they were Sephardi Jews. And I would say, as I belong to them, we were what they call the pure Sephardi Jews. Please. Yes, because, and we still believe that we are, because Sephardi in Hebrew means Spanish. Sepharad in the Bible means Spain. And when they called the Sephardic Jews, this was about the Jews who had been exiled from Spain. Today they mix, everybody in Israel or in the world who is not an Ashkenazi Jew becomes automatically a Sephardi Jew. My mother, I would say, these people, these Tedescos, are they really Jewish? Because she had a very nice friend, her name was Shelley Rosenfeld. She was such a sweet lady, she couldn't be that bad. And my mother told me, you know, they're like Jews, she said. Like Jews. And they, you know, when the chief rabbi of Sofia was carrying out the prayer on Saturday, he would say, "Dear Jewish friends," and some Tedescos, right? Which were outside of the community. And that was, and I saw really the majority when I came to Israel. Could you imagine my surprise to find myself surrounded by like Jews, as in this country, of course. And the Bulgarian Jews had also another thing which was very important. They were very deeply integrated in Bulgarian life. They spoke Bulgarian very well. They dressed like Bulgarians. And there was one element which is very unpleasant, but which exists, we cannot deny it, that in many places, the Jews, one of the reasons of anti-Semitism was the hatred, the instinctive, primitive hatred of the alien, who looks different, who speaks a different language, who has different kind of rights. This element did not exist in Bulgaria, because the Bulgarian Jews looked very much like Bulgarians, spoke Bulgarian better than the Bulgarians, and even were very deeply devoted to the country. Although being less than 1% of the population, there were between 4 and 8% in the numbers of soldiers who fought in Bulgaria's wars, and the people fallen and decorated by Bulgaria for bravery. They felt very strongly belonging to this country. And as I said, in spite of the fact that they were not religious, they were very patriotic Bulgarians. On the other hand, Bulgaria was a very tolerant country toward the Jewish people. Bulgaria was for the last 500 years, until 1878, under Turkish rule. And under the Turkish yoke, actually everybody was equal. The average Bulgarian grew together with Greeks, with Turks, with Jews, with Gypsies, with Armenians, and they were all equal. So when Bulgaria was finally liberated, by the way, by the Russian army, which she always remembered,